Good morning, everyone. This is Tom with CertifID. We had over 1,000 people registered for today's webinar, so we're just going to give it about 60 seconds so that everyone can come into Zoom, and then we will start. We'll start in about a minute or so. So just hang tight a second. We'll let everyone else join. Thank you. Good. All right, guys, we're going to get started. For those of you I haven't had the pleasure to meet, I'm Tom Cronkrite. I'm one of the owners and co-founders of CertifID. In today's session, I am just absolutely blown away by the attendance. We had over 1,000 register for this webinar, and I promise it is going to be well worth the time. So strap in. By way of introduction and housekeeping, just quickly, this is intentionally an open dialogue, and we have a very special and rare guest with us today. We have Stephen Doherty, who is a member of the Global Investigative Operations Center of the Secret Service. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on a federal holiday from your home to join us in this event. And we're really happy that you're here to share some candid information with us.
Very excited to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. This is one of my passions, and I'm glad we can get the word out and discuss this further.
No, awesome. And he's been read into the idea, guys, that most of us are in the title space, legal, lending, some other sectors, but we're all kind of a community focused around just preventing wire fraud and just making our businesses and our customers more secure or protected. So by way of housekeeping, for those of you who don't know and have not used the CertifID platform, we created a solution to securely confirm bank credentials or securely share credentials for wires in and out of accounts, particularly escrow and IOLTA trust accounts. And we actually insure each one of those through our partners at Lloyd's of London for $1 million per wire. So again, this is meant to be an open dialogue. We have basically three major themes: what is happening, how it's happening, and what we can do to start to think about the movements and how the cyber fraud landscape is shaping to position ourselves for not only the end of this year, which is going to be a busy one, but also into 2021. So we are going to dive straight into this thing. So again, and we'll be recording this so for those of you that want to follow up and use this for training or for any type of education after, feel free. We don't have slides. This is intentionally meant to be a conversation between ourselves and Stephen and you to just get some things addressed and maybe off your mind and operationalized. I've had the pleasure to work closely with Stephen and his team over the past few months as we've got to know each other. The Secret Service has been a tireless advocate in the area of just preventing cyber and financial crime. They're fantastic recovery experts, but they're one of those just look good guys. So before I forget, Stephen, thank you for the team and everyone else at GIOC and our friends at the FBI for what you do each and every day, because I speak for the 1,000 or so people on here that what you do matters. We're out here just trying to navigate some pretty choppy water, especially in real estate, as we're trying to get multiple parties to a closing and have a safe and secure closing experience. So, all right, Stephen, I'm going to put you on the hot seat. 2020 cyber fraud trends. Obviously, March kind of tilted the axis of the world when COVID hit. And I'm just wondering how you would summarize, in your view, the COVID level impact around wire fraud.
So it's been unprecedented. It's definitely been an obstacle and a challenge to us in federal law enforcement to really work around it and with it. The biggest impact we've had is obviously, so I call it the surface area of threat has increased. You have people who've migrated from working solely at a office-based computer on an enterprise server, it's much harder to get into. Now everybody's using a web-based platform that are much easier for compromise. The security systems and settings set up are just not as strong as once existed with the enterprise servers and the enterprise applications. So you're seeing just a lot more compromise and threat just because everybody's working from home, working on a cloud system that is just much easier to penetrate for our cyber criminals.
How are those threats coming in? Like, could you summarize some of the top threats that you've seen? Is it because we've had to do the same thing, right? Everyone gets dispersed, they work from home, we settle into this kind of new normal. Now we're starting to feel the COVID fatigue, but do you see any type of pattern around, is it a threat that comes into the individual employee on a personal level? Like, hey, here's a free cup of coffee coupon, or here's a free cruise if they ever leave port again, or is it something more, business type or corporate type? Any pattern there?
So this has affected everybody from your individual employees all the way up to the largest governmental organizations. We've seen large municipalities, large national governments be hit with different scams. A lot of them are non-delivery scams affecting large governments who they want to order, $30 million worth of ventilators. And it turns out that it's a large network of fraud that has obfuscated what's actually going on. And, luckily we've stopped most of it, but we've seen some money walk out the door because of that. And then all the way down to your individual, you're seeing people who are receiving some of these emails that are then deploying malware across their systems because they're just not taking the normal precaution they once would with working from home. With the communication also has changed. You used to discuss things face to face with people. Now everything's just over email, and people really hesitate to pick up the phone and verify something. So they see something, they get an email, they act on it, thinking it's legitimate. They want to be as efficient as possible. They're working from home. They may have their kids around, or they want to keep pleasing their boss and keep everything going so they can continue working from home. That's what's safe for them. So there's a lot of impetus for them to actually act on some of these that normally they would have avoided. So it's stuff that's hitting the individual, and you have the stuff affecting the larger organizational structures of governments and large corporations.
Do you think, and I subscribe to this, but I don't want to change how you might answer this question, but there's been so much change, right? And so much disruption in people's lives and the way that we're doing business. Do you think that kind of constant state of change has made people more susceptible? I view it as, well, we can blame everything on COVID, so why not change the payment instructions, or why not click on? Do you think there's some of that in kind of our psyche right now?
Yes, 100%. Again, anything that involves change, you're not only are you changing just your everyday life, a lot of people actually either switched roles or had to add or modify their roles. So they were doing new jobs that they weren't used to as well. So they're not used to the same safeguards and training maybe that they probably should have had. So that's one thing we've been seeing. And yeah, it's just whenever you have change, whenever you have chaos or disruption, criminal actors always find a way into that. You can compare it to say prohibition in that sense, where they banned alcohol, and then the next day you saw just an absolute exponential rise in organized crime to run that. Well, same thing has happened here, where you just have the change here. Criminals see they can take advantage of it, and they move quickly and get in. And that's how we've had the top scams of 2020. If you want me to go over a couple of those, I can definitely discuss those, what we're seeing.
I do, but I want you to back us up in what it looked like at the end of 19 going into 20, and then how quickly things pivoted. I think you and I have talked about this the last few weeks, but walk us through that journey, just to cast an understanding of how almost opportunistic the cyber criminals are when they see an opportunity or some type of disruption.
Mm-hmm. So towards the end of 2019, we were seeing relatively structured cyber-enabled financial crime. We were seeing an uptick in ransomware, as was expected. Business email compromise was exponentially on the rise, especially around the holidays. It gets big because a lot of people are trying to get stuff done, wrap up the end of the year, and move on. So you see a lot of these, people sending the wire transfers they shouldn't have, or instances of wire fraud really pop up. But then as 2020 rolled in, we started to see sort of change. The first instance of change we saw was everybody panicked in February. And they're like, we all need PPP. We all need the protective gear for COVID. We need the masks, the gowns, everything. So we saw an absolute influx of non-delivery scams, essentially, or phishing scams related to people trying to buy PPP. So, you have people saying, yeah, I'll send you 10,000 masks, just wire me the 20 grand that'll cost and you'll have your mask. And people were so panicky and so scared that they went ahead and did that. There was a ton of loss there. And that evolved into people, saying, hey, I sent you this 20 grand. I never got it. What's going on? And the fraudsters will respond back, oh yeah, that's a mistake on our part. Just give us your bank account information and we'll wire it back to you. Well, sometimes that does happen, but you also get another wire for a couple $100,000 that the fraudster then tells you, say, oh, that was for another project we were working on. We're sorry. Can you please wire that money out? Now, none of you have been scammed out of your money, but now you're also a complicit money launderer for these people because they're now using your bank account to then conduct money laundering for other fraud.
That unbelievable. I'm not that creative of a thinker, obviously.
Yeah. And then obviously from there, it's evolved into, we had just the massive amounts of unemployment fraud where these criminal actors had access to, hundreds of thousands of identities and were able to attack all the states using those because they dropped the safeguards to receive unemployment insurance. So we saw a lot of that go on, a bunch of news articles and news pieces on that. And then they pivoted even further when the payroll protection came out. And the SBA loans, they then pivoted to there to set up these fake companies that then received SBA loan fraud as well. So they've become multifaceted and dynamic in times of COVID.
Almost in real time, if I'm hearing it. So it went from mass to unemployment to now the PPP loan protection.
Yes.
That was available. What's happening now? I mean, pull us through to kind of current, right? We're in beginning of November here. Have things settled out? What changes are you seeing in the plays they're running?
We think we've seen a slowdown in the unemployment and the SBA loan fraud. We're hoping. But what happens there is these guys just pivot back to their other frauds they were doing. So the ransomware, the business email compromise, they've gone right back to that. And I've seen an absolute surge in BEC in the past couple of weeks. Following sort of our lockdown and protection of the unemployment and the SBA loan fraud.
Got it. So they just pivot. It's just a pendulum, right? Oh, there's an opportunity here. Here's a shiny object. Let's go run that down. And then they go back. What do you see as kind of staples going into end of this year into 2021? And I don't mean to say that in a positive way, but what do you think we can expect? Assuming that COVID starts to wind down or nothing, significantly changes based on what we've already seen. But what do you think we're in for the next 12 months?
I still think we're going to see a rise in business email compromise just because the landscape that we have set up now, I don't foresee it changing. I see a lot of people who are still going to remain working from home for the foreseeable future because it's what works. And it's, depending on how schools are going and how other municipalities are handling it, it's going to be the popular option. So that's not going to change. So you're going to see continuing rise in BEC style attacks. And that's where they compromise your email account. They take the privileged information from there, and then they use that to either misdirect or change a wire transfer or transfer of funds to a criminally controlled bank account. So we're going to see, I definitely think, an uptick in that. We always usually see it around the holiday season, as I had mentioned before, because people are trying to wrap up their work and get everything done for the year. So they're not as attentive to the details than they normally would be. And also a lot of businesses, Tom, I mentioned this earlier, their fiscal year is set to end on October 1st. So these budgets come in and a lot of money is sent in. And so a lot of stuff gets bought and purchased, moved around. And so criminals hop on that as well. So we might see that for the next couple of months as well.
No, I think the other thing that we'll see, and I completely agree with you, is, with the threat of maybe a restructuring of capital gains of the tax code, I think there's going to be a flurry of activity, sale activity between now and the end of the year to take advantage of what has been a historically low caps gain rate into something that could be a little higher going into 2021. You mentioned a few different times, and please, guys, we're about ready to wrap this session and go into another one where we're going to focus on real estate. But any questions that you have around high-level trends, please submit those now. There's a screen that you can't see in front of me where I'll decide which ones that we pose to Stephen. But please ask those. So, Stephen, one more question on this one. You mentioned malware. What type of malware are you seeing most frequently? And malware, guys, if you're not familiar with the term, is this idea that you click on a link, you download you download a file, a Word document, a PDF, an Excel file, you run a macro or a script because, you're launching whatever it is, your Zoom or WebEx or Teams or whatever, and you end up with an unwanted application on your device. And I'm just curious if you've seen, Stephen, trends of what is that unwanted application doing on the network or on the computer?
Mm-hmm. We're still seeing trends of the two different types of malware. I pretty much see are ones that are installed that are keyloggers that essentially just track everything you type on your computer, and it's very easy to see. You can see putting in a username, and then you can put in your password, and boom, they have a username and password. Another thing is called a RAT, or remote access Trojan, that allows them to remotely access your system and see what data is lying around that they can then get a hold of or get into your email system from there. And once they compromise your system, they only need to compromise your system once. What these guys are doing is they get into your system, they set up email rules or inbox forwarding or filter settings, and that basically essentially sends out every email you receive related to a particular subject, then it deletes that auto-forwarded out email, so you're not seeing it. And what's really kind of malicious about it is you can change your password, you can enable multi-factor authentication for this, but that rule still exists. So I've had a lot of victims say, I practice really safe hygiene. We have password changes. I go in and look at their system. They've had this email rule for 6 months, and it's forwarded out a ton of personal or very sensitive business information. So that's sort of the trend we're still seeing for malware, and then the second step for the malware.
That brings up an alarming issue. How is that detected and prevented?
It's detected by having good audit logging and having a good control on what rules can be set up and established. I find it best to give control to generally somebody in your IT department that can control and see every email rule being set up. And you can definitely there are ways to do that.
Yep. So ultimately someone goes in, tries to toggle an auto forwarding rule, and my head of IT or security would get a flag that says, hey, somebody's changing a rule within Tom's account or whatever it happens to be.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And
that could be set up, just to be clear, we have a lot of people that may be using Gmail or interacting with channel partners or business partners on Gmail. That could be something that's restricted through really any email account, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most, if not all, email clients should be able to do that.
So we have a question here that says, in some of the security news feeds, we've seen an increase about ransomware. Is this indicative of an increase in ransomware activity kind of overall, or what are you seeing? We've seen a massive increase in social engineering and BEC, right? Phishing, mm-hmm. because that activity just says, hey, I don't need to necessarily get into somebody's computer or system. I just need to trick Tim or Sally or Jack or Rhonda somewhere in an organization. And to your point, make it believable enough that the instructions I'm giving them is what they should wire funds to. But what is it at scale with ransomware? Up, down, steady state?
So I'm not a ransomware expert. Unfortunately, my expertise does lie with the business email compromise and money laundering aspect of the cyber-enabled financial fraud. But for ransomware, I believe we're seeing either a steady track or definitely an increase on that, and we're not seeing a decrease in ransomware.
How about all these online platforms that we're doing right now, where normally you and I would be on a stage together and we're doing a large presentation or whatever it happens to be? Any increase in just hacking online platforms like this? Have you seen that? We passcode protect absolutely everything, but just curious.
I mean, yeah, you've seen definitely. So for the most part, one of the things, the most glaring one you see are criminal actors are attacking the platforms being used for education. So you saw, I don't know if you saw the first days for a lot of colleges and universities went very, very badly because criminal actors decided they were going to take these down and not allow people to use it. So that's more of what we're seeing on that end, which is not as malicious, but still can be very disruptive to people's lives.
Yeah, 100%. All right. More questions are coming in. We're not going to be able to get to all these, but we're going to pivot to real estate because I'm seeing we're 20 minutes after, and we commit to keeping these to about 45 minutes. Let's talk about wire fraud in real estate. You guys have been absolutely fantastic when we've reached out to help in recovery efforts, and we'll get into that a little bit more in the segment. But let's focus in on what you're seeing in the real estate sector. More activity, less activity. Why is it a target? Who's targeted? Let it just kind of in your words, Stephen. What are we seeing in that industry?
We have seen an increase in real estate attacks, namely because with interest rates being so low, you have so many people who have now decided to go ahead and buy. So them hopping into the market as new buyers has really, when you're a first-time home buyer, it's drinking through a fire hose. There's so much information you're getting, so many things you have to do, and so it's been pretty easy just to hit these guys with a spoofed attack email saying, hey, your closing is going to go great. It's coming up in a week. Make sure you send your down payment to our new account instead of our old account. People see these emails, they think it looks very legitimate, and they go ahead and walk to the bank and wire off their, life savings. Generally, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars to these fraudsters' accounts. And once it hits there, it moves very quickly and it's gone. So with a lot of new home buyers, we're seeing an increase in the vulnerability and fraud. So that's one of the alarming trends we're definitely seeing along the lines of real estate BEC. So I think it's going to be definitely important when you have new home buyers to really educate them of the fact that this wire fraud exists and have them protect themselves.
No, I couldn't say it better myself. Let's walk through when the money does land in that account. What are some of the trends on just the movement of money and laundering that you're seeing? A lot of people, and we've been through it, so we understand how quickly things move. But it seems like that time just continues to compress in the just how quickly you have to act if you want any chance of recovery.
Yeah, and this is actually my true passion in investigations is following the money, because that just unravels so many different things. So the money laundering is very interesting. You have generally with a real estate BEC, the money stays domestic at first because most home buyers or whoever's sending that down payment would really think it's suspicious to see a international account receiving their down payment. It doesn't make sense. So what these criminal actors have done, they've set up a network of money mules across the country. And they do it in two ways. They either have witting money mules, people who they've recruited, they know what they're doing, they're setting up the fake businesses, they're moving the money themselves. Secondly, they get and recruit unwitting money mules. And this is particularly scary and alarming for us. They are romance scam victims, or they're thinking they're working from home for an accounts receivable company. And they're just told, hey, you work for us, you're going to collect our payments in the US, and then you have to wire them out for us. They think it's all legitimate. They draw up all the employment documents and it looks very, very legitimate for these people. And they'll receive a $500,000 wire that, it looks like it's for a real estate purchase. And that's what the company says they're doing. And then they're instructed to wire the money to Hong Kong or to send half the money to Mexico and then go and send the rest to a digital currency crypto wallet that the criminal actors should then just directly access and pull all the funds out from that. So there's multiple different ways they're doing it. And there's multiple hops set up through these networks of both witting and unwitting money mules.
Yeah, we had a recovery you guys were involved in recently where it was and I think just by way of an example, a mid-60s woman involved in an online dating relationship and was instructed by her boyfriend that he was doing some business in the US and you needed to open up a company account at a large money center bank. And I think one of the frustrations, and I'll get to kind of how this ended, but one of the frustrations is, how can the banks allow this money to continue to move when clearly it's fraud? Clearly this is money laundering or there's a crime being committed. But if you think about it, the know your customer requirements are basically subverted, if you will, if you have a law-abiding citizen coming in with corporate papers saying, I'm just creating a business, I'm starting a business. Mm-hmm. But it's it's the criminal pulling the strings in the background of what's really going to take place through that account. Is that a fair summary?
Exactly. Yeah, it's one of the bigger obstacles for the banks right now, especially the larger banks. I mean, they just see so much volume that it's really hard for them to be able to nail down and keep track of every single account that's open on their platform. And obviously it's going to be used for malicious reasons. But again, people are coming in what looks to be 100% legitimate. And you can't deny them their right to open these bank accounts because they think they are starting a business. They really think they are. And for the KYC that's in place now, it does fulfill some of those requirements. So the accounts get open. They're set up as business accounts, so they're expected to receive a large wire, and the money hits it, and then boom, moves on.
Yeah, and that's what we saw. A big chunk of cash move from a southern state up to the state of Washington, and then she was immediately instructed to pull a cashier's check out and put it in an express mail, and off it went. And we're seeing that more and more now.
Yeah.
Do you see them seasoning their account? So I always wondered this, is that just seems like the banks could have triggers that says, hey, the natural inflow or outflow of this bank account has been, below $10,000 per swing over the last, whatever it happens to be, week or 90 days or whatever it is. And now we get a plug of like 1.2 million. And you'd think that would just like, and I know you can't slow the Federal Reserve System down by flagging and making every wire an exception. But it just seems to me that there's just some anomalies that these banks could maybe identify and start to help us with.
So banks do have new account monitoring where they have like a 90-day period where everything coming in does get flagged and looked at. What the criminal actors have now done is they've recruited mostly unwitting money mules who have had bank accounts at these banks for 20 years. Or they know that they've set up a small little retirement business because they advertise on LinkedIn per se and say, I'm a freelance accounts manager. Let me know if you guys want to, do business with me. And then the fraudsters will reach out pretending to be legitimate businesses, and they'll use the business account for this guy who's had business running through his accounts receivable account for 20 years with a bank. So they don't see it as flagged, right? So the money comes in, it looks good to everybody, it goes out. Now the fraud report comes in. Now that business is liable for that loss, and they're going to lose their account at that bank that they've had for years and years. So not only is the financial loss there, but then further economic impact and losses sustained after that.
No, 100%. Back to, and we got 25 minutes left and more ground to cover. Katie's reminding me over here. I'm at right.
Well, we can talk about this forever. Let me tell you.
No, we can, and maybe we will. But we've seen that as it's reported through the IC3's annual report, real estate continues to be a top crime for BEC. You see that continuing being one of those top tiers of targets for BEC?
Unfortunately, yes. And it's just such a good target because, as you mentioned before, there's multiple parties involved coming to the table. As I said before, there's a lot of information involved that's floating out, that's out there. And there's a lot of easily attainable information as well. You compromise the real estate agent's account, so now you know that. And in his account, you can find a HUD statement per se, and use that and send that as your proof that you're a legitimate actor trying to get that. But we are still going to see, I still think, an uptick in continuing threat to the real estate sector. And I always find I always find the real estate sector to be particularly insidious because it's individual victims, it's their life savings. So that one we have to protect more so than I think any other industry out there right now.
No, I couldn't agree more. And what we found in real estate, and we've talked about this, is just the lack of muscle memory, in the sense that you're just so infrequently involved in a real estate transaction. So by definition, your first-time home buyers, this is the first time. Everything's new. So they don't have a baseline of somebody that's in it every single day or week to know, something that can be trusted versus something that should be suspicious. And then you kind of bookend that with, a lot of times they're buying homes from people that are retiring, they're downsizing, right? So you have this kind of both ends of the populist spectrum that have been out. Either I'm new to it, or I haven't been in it in decades. And it's kind of like new there as well. And I agree. And what we've seen is, because of COVID and this idea that we were socially distanced through technology and email before, now we're physically distanced. So a lot of times the lender's not showing up to the closing. The title company is working on some type of a remote platform to do the closing and notary process to keep everyone safe. And we've just seen an uptick in impersonation and scams, because they know that there's not that last physical check that could avert a fraud. So it stinks to hear, but this is good information for all of us. So a couple of questions on this topic, and then we're going to move to the next one. Where is it better to report a fraud? The IC3 or report at ftc.gov? Do you just fire all of them out and just like light the beacon up? That's what I would do, right? Let's make sure that whoever has time and can kind of get a jump on this. Let's get the ball rolling for recovery.
Yeah, report everywhere you can as quickly as you can. IC3 is a great resource. We use that a bunch. Thank you for the FBI for keeping that going, setting that up. IC3 is great. FTC.gov is also great too. Also, if you have a good connection or can with your local police department, you can report it to them. Or you can look up and research local field offices for the Secret Service or for the FBI or any other federal law enforcement and report to them as well. I say report, report, report. It's sort of one of my mantras, because the more information we have there, that's how we figure out the networks. That's how we figure out who's actually doing this. So the more information you report to us, the better. And even if you catch it, even if it's an unsuccessful attempt and you stop it and you're like, yeah, we stopped this guy, report it, because we'll still use that information as well. We need as much information as possible to prevent this crime in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's what I've learned is we've shared information, just that you guys are connecting very large patterns out there that we'll never know about or maybe publicly disclose, but that's always important. Another question, look, I'm a small company. Is there a good resource just to kind of audit and check my state of the union, how vulnerable or how protected I might be as a small company? And we're going to get into some of the solutions at the end, but just any quick thoughts on how do I know? Like, am I on the bottom? So, I mean, what's my attack surface? Is it wide or is it really narrow, right? To use your terms.
I mean, as I said before, everybody's very vulnerable. So everybody should, if you have the means and capability, there's numerous cybersecurity companies out there that you can contract to come take a look at stuff, both large and small. I can't particularly endorse any particular one, but there are very many out there if you can do the research. And also, cyber insurance is always a good idea if you can get that as well. BEC does fall under cyber insurance now, so that's definitely something to look into. If you guys are, conducting this type of business, it might be very wise to have that to protect you guys and to protect yourself in the future and your clients.
One more recovery related question, and it's a good one. So what do we do when a wire has been misdirected? We got the FBI report, police report, but there's this concern that the bank may not do anything until they have proof that this is a fraudulent wire. And as an attorney, not to give legal advice, but the challenge is, you're exactly right. You're asking the institution that received the funds to freeze somebody's assets without any due process, without really any documentation. You're just saying, hey, I file a report, I suspect this is fraud, or I know in my gut it's fraud, but they're on the other end. What we saw in our fraud experience is they'll recruit attorneys to work for these networks so that when funds are frozen, the attorney goes ballistic on bank counsel, threatening lawsuits and damages and everything else to get those funds relieved or unfrozen so that they can move quickly to wherever the end destination is, overseas, crypto wallets, buying gift cards, whatever it happens to be. So Stephen, what I know, because I've seen you guys in the FBI, you guys have special authority to kind of work into those fraud networks, but what does the average company owner do to raise a signal to a bank that says, look, you need to stop the money from moving so that we can get our hands on this?
So I can't go into full detail with that, but the banking process, generally, you need to let that's probably the very first step you should do if you encounter wire fraud, is alert your bank as soon as possible. They have the ability to do your bank, your sending bank. They have the ability to do a wire recall if possible, and they can do a process called hold harmless or indemnification, where your bank tells the receiving bank, hey, my customer is saying this is fraud, we want this money back, and they have their own process to work that out. So that's the very first thing you should do, is get to your sending bank, then talk to the receiving bank, because they have their own network and legal system to communicate that way and get the funds frozen. We can step in different means to assist with that in a variety of ways we can do. We don't really like to talk about publicly what we can do, but we can definitely assist with some of that if need be.
Cool. We're bumping up against the line, so I'm going to take you back off it. Some crazy fraud examples. All right, Stephen, I'm gonna let you freestyle here a bit, and just some of the things that were just outrageous, as much as you can share. I don't care what industry. This is more just what has stood up and made you scratch your head, or keep you up at night with some of the things that have happened this year.
Just the level of misunderstanding that goes on with this. We had one case where it was a wealthy gentleman. He was trying to buy a yacht. He owed like a $300,000 down payment. And so he's talking with the yacht company, and they're like, yeah, you just, wire us your down payment. So he takes it upon himself to go ahead and send a $300,000 wire. His assistant sees it the next day, and she's like, "Oh, this is still outstanding. I'll also send a $300,000 wire." So the yacht company now is sitting on two different wires from our soon-to-be victim. The yacht company reaches out to our victim and says, "Hey, you accidentally sent your wire transfer twice. We can just send it right back to your standard account. That's fine." He says, "Yeah, that's great." But what the two parties don't know is somebody had compromised both email accounts, both the yacht company and the victim, and sent spoof directions 10 minutes after the victim said, "Return to my account," saying, "Hey, we've actually changed our mind. We're going to invest that money into a different account. Send it to this account." So the yacht company wires off $300,000 of this guy's money. Luckily, we found the money and we stopped it. We actually made a fair amount of arrests in this case, and it was a pretty big success for us. But then there's also the side we don't see or talk about. It's the civil litigation side. So the yacht buyer victim was very angry with the yacht company. He sued them. There was a settlement involved where the yacht company would send a certain amount of money back to the victim. Well, the yacht company secured up their systems. They found the compromise, stopped that, did everything they needed to do. Our victim did not. He did not secure his email account, and so was using the same email account to communicate with the yacht company about where the settlement funds were going to be moved, and the criminal actors were still in there looking. So even for the settlement, they sent a spoofed email to the yacht company saying, "Hey, we see our settlement's due. You owe us, this amount of money. Send it to our new account over here. We switched accounts because of all of this." Well, luckily, the yacht company did notice that, hey, we've seen this before, and reached out to the victim, and they stopped it, but we figured out. But so these guys are relentless. They don't quit. They'll stay on a target and a victim as long as they can. And we see it happens repeatedly. It'll happen over weeks and months that sometimes they don't even know. So that's one of the alarming things that occurs about this. So you constantly have to be checking things and double checking things and making sure you're putting eyes on everything you're doing and being as careful as you can.
We had a similar situation. You guys were involved in the recovery, but the buyers or the fraudsters came in impersonating the title company, trying to get the buyer's cash to close diverted. It was $20,000. The buyer, who was read in, that's why education plays such a huge role in being that first line of defense, was queued up like the yacht company in your example, saying, "This looks fishy. I need to verify." So they were unsuccessful in getting the buyer's cash to close, but then on the same file went back on the mortgage payoff and was successful in diverting just under $200,000 on the same file on the mortgage that was being paid on behalf of the seller. So it's scary. And to your point, when they're in an account, why not, right? I got a buyer play, I'll run that. That didn't work. Mm-hmm. I got a mortgage payoff play. I got a seller net proceeds play, whatever it happens to be. And in real estate, there's typically, in a single transaction, seven transfers, right? Mm-hmm. You got 3 incoming from the buyer, you got EMD, cash to close, and new loan proceeds. And on the outbound side, especially in more affluent districts, just the commissions alone to the real estate brokers can be tens of thousands of dollars that they're hijacking. So, all right. Walk through how sophisticated you see just kind of this almost like BEC as a service model developing from a hierarchy standpoint, because I think a lot of people may think that these are just, young guys in hoodies eating Doritos and drinking, Mountain Dew Max. And, when they hit one a year, they're upgrading their gaming system. And it's so much further from that right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You like taking my tagline about the Doritos and Mountain Dew. Everybody
didn't even know it was your tagline.
That's the way I describe them, but no, it's entirely false. These guys operate as a business. I refer to it as the enterprise business model. It's a top down from a C-suite level all the way down to administrators and mules and enforcers. And it spans the globe. We see the C-suites generally sitting overseas in Eastern Europe, China, West Africa. And then they send out and recruit people across the world. They want to attack German companies. They will find a German speaker, write their emails for them. They want to attack people in the UK, but they don't have a money mule network there. They'll reach out to somebody they may know who does have a money mule network in the UK to move money for them. So this is on a global scale. There's hundreds of players involved in each organization, and it is set up as a business. You have the C-suite on down, and they even refer to themselves as CEO, boss man, all sorts of stuff like that as well, to try and legitimize them as actual businessmen.
If only they could solve for clean water or hunger or so many other things. So
Mhm.
one question came up on this, and then we're going to pivot to like, what can we do, right? It's not all peril. There are things that we can systematically do if we break this down and start to build it up in more of a compliant, almost like culture of compliance and security. But the last question that came in on this is, recent fraud, an agent, I'm assuming a title agent, fell victim and sent $150,000 when the funds were returned. There was a shortage. Does the agent have any recovery path for that 10,000? So I'll answer this first, Stephen, and then maybe you could step in. Guys, what we've seen, and we've seen it over and over, is wire transfers are immediate. There's no seizing. They are absolute good funds. So theoretically, if I sent money to Stephen right now, once it lands, let's say it's 8 minutes from now, he could transfer all of that to another account or accounts. That's the thing, right? There's no restriction on how that gets converted. So a lot of times they'll take a small packet of that money and they'll pay off some credit cards, or they'll prepay something, or they'll convert, they'll pull it out in like 9,000 or whatever to avoid the Patriot Act disclosure in cash, but they'll convert some of it. And that 10,000 is just that small kind of seed packet. Shoot, that could be just the fee for the money mule to move the money in this play. When we got defrauded, a money mule who was on the Interpol list flew into Germany, into New York, just to move our money to 3 different accounts in Texas, and then flew right back to Germany. And her fee for that, which we could see, was $20,000 off 180. And that was her role in that. And he mentioned the intercontinental nature of this. But I think, one, if you're the one that sent the funds, you're likely the one that's going to suffer the loss, even if it's a third party loss. And the challenge in the court system right now, which is why insurance and the protection, anything you can get, is that it's really hard to litigate for something under $100,000. And I hate to say that, but if you really pencil out cost of defense, these lawsuits are super complicated. They span between breach of contract, express or implied. They span between negligence and professional negligence. They span between consumer protection laws. And we just don't have a lot of case law to say, look, oh, it fits within this, you can get out on summary dispositions. That was somebody else's problem. And we don't have that right now. So, Stephen, what do you think? Hey, I got almost a full recovery. I'm 10 short. I would argue the title agency in this case is probably staring at that $10,000 liability.
I mean, that's a little out of our wheelhouse in terms of that. But again, having the protection, the insurance is the way to go for that. And yeah, so that's a little out of our wheelhouse to answer. But yeah, but the insurance is probably the best way to go about that. And also just to be open and in good contact with your bank as well, so they can help you and work with you as much as possible. Because the banks are starting to really take notice on this as well, because they're not taking losses to it. So in the beginning, they're like, we're not seeing a loss here, so we don't see what the big deal is. But now their customers are losing money. So now at the end of the day, they lose money. So they are seeing it now. So again, rely on your insurance, rely on your banks.
One trend we are seeing, and I know Katie's saying 5 minutes. So one trend we are seeing is that when a bank is sued, so let's say the title agency said, you know what, I'm not eating this 10 grand. I'm going after my bank because they should have done more to protect me and identified that was a fraudulent wire. The banks have been successful. Now we're starting to see federal case precedent, district federal court, where the banks are pivoting out of these conversations and getting summary disposition, basically the case being dismissed in their favor on what I call a garbage in, garbage out scenario, where the bank, if they validate that somebody that has authority over that account is authorizing the transfer, they are in no way responsible where the money is going. And even if they don't do anything when they're notified to help in recovery, that they can't be liable for that either. So that's the one alarming thing for companies like us, because I'm also a large title agency owner in addition to the owner certified, is that we move a lot of other people's stuff. We move a lot of money for other people, but the bank is not there. At least that's the precedent being set, that we're on our own. So it's up to our policies, procedures, insurance, to your point. So that's a great roll in quickly, Stephen, to the next segment is, what do we do to protect ourselves? Right. So how do you see technology? I've always described it as people, process, technology. You create this nucleus of those, the convergence of those three, to lower that attack surface from something that is a sheet of glass wide to something that's very narrow that could either prevent or just frustrate the fraudster to a point where they move on to the neighbor or the next play in their roster, who knows where they're going next, that's more vulnerable. But how do you see technology playing a role in this?
It's very important, from just as easy it is to keep everything, your systems updated, your patches downloaded, but it detects and protects against the malware they deploy, to using two-factor authentication. These guys are criminal actors and cyber fraud actors are, I wouldn't call them lazy per se, but they take the path of least resistance. So if you put something in front of them, an obstacle in front of them, they're going to pivot, or they're going to go somewhere else where the penetration or the compromise is easier to do. So using technology in those ways, there's other stuff out there as well called like DMARC, which authenticates emails as well. The two-factor authentication and keeping updated on your security and your software patches is the way to go, and it really does throw an obstacle in front of these guys. And we see just so much when we speak to the victims, they just don't practice good IT hygiene, and they usually fall victim to multiple scams. I see people fall victim to a ransomware, and they just threw out their equipment. They didn't do anything to actually remedy the situation. And then 3 months later, they're hit with a BEC, and they're like, "How did this happen?" I'm like, "Well, they were looking at your information the entire time." So keep as good IT hygiene as possible, and use technology as your safety barrier there, and it really will help.
We've seen, in addition to technology to keep that bad stuff out, that BEC really stems from a lack of identity verification at a critical point in the transaction, right? That ultimately results in a wire being misdirected or diverted. We refer to that as wire fraud in the industry, but do you agree that identity verification has to play a critical role when it comes to BEC avoidance or trying to contain the risk around BEC?
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Knowing exactly who you're communicating with diffuses that threat. And they use tricks as easy as the display name, where the email comes in and it'll display your name, the name of who you think is sending it. But if you actually click on it, it'll be an email address that is nowhere near related to it. So that's an easy trick they do as well. So that's one thing to look out for. So yeah, identity verification is huge.
So we had a buyer approached, I'll share with you because it was our example. We had a buyer approached that we used CertifID and was read in and averted the fraud. But I sent you a PDF that was very interesting. Walk the group through what that PDF looked like, and maybe as much as you can describe what ultimately that led to.
Mm-hmm. So again, these criminal actors try to act as efficiently, as quickly as they can. So one of them, or a group of them, had assembled a list of all their mule accounts, anything they wanted to wire money through, into one large PDF. And they used a couple different techniques to then mask that. However, when we were looking at it, when we were doing an analysis of it, we uncovered that, and we uncovered numerous bank accounts that were in one PDF document that opened up a lot of stuff for us to really look at. And it was interesting at how they were doing that. And it gives us some good information to work on. But yeah, so when you guys get stuff like that, when you guys are attacked like that, definitely share as much as you can, because it does help.
No, we'll continue to. So we talked about technology. What about education, both internally for employees, for our vendor partners, our referral partners? So in real estate, it's interesting because a lot of times the real estate agent, the attorney, or the lender, builder, developer is directing the buyer or the seller to the title settlement provider. So how does education play a role in BEC defense?
I mean, it's paramount. So many victims I've talked to realize, or have said to me, I didn't even know this existed, or this was a possibility of something that could even happen. Education is the first line of defense, and it's the best line of defense. Educated and vigilant consumer really is what's going to end up stopping this. And so as much education as you can push out, the better. You can do quick little seminars with your employees. You can even do organizations now do phishing training, where an employee will receive a phishing email, they click on it, and now you have to go do the training for it. You can do a similar thing with a BEC. It would be a little more of a complex issue, but you could definitely send a spoofed email and see what your employees do with it, and then initiate training if needed on that. That's something you can do. And then just have disclaimers in your emails, and just as much word you can put out on this, the better, because again, it's a $26 billion loss to our economy over the past few years, and we really need to slow it down and stop it.
Unbelievable. No, I agree. Guys, if you have any last minute questions, we're going to wrap up here in just a few minutes just to stay true to time. And Stephen's been gracious enough to come from home on a federal holiday to join us. And I thought this was a fantastic discussion. I'll echo what you said, Stephen, as we have approached from our learning and how we kind of assembled our sequence through certified and kind of next best practice. It starts with education. You have an educated and engaged employee base. You've got your referral partners that are read into this issue, what to watch out for, but it's got to reach the consumer, especially the buyers. The buyers need to know up funnel, like at the time that the agency or the lender relationship is formed, that there's this thing out there that you could be exposed to, that you could be harmed by, called wire fraud or email compromise fraud. And here's what to watch out for. And I think the most successful companies in this area have created very tight lanes on what to expect. So there's a fraud, it's bad, here's what to watch out for, and here's what to expect. And you have to speak in very plain English, because especially for a first-time home buyer, everything's new. So I finally got the house after I put 5 offers in and all those weren't accepted because there's no inventory. And my lender's asking me for everything from, am I COVID positive, to blood testing, to, my ancestry registry. Like, they want everything right now, right? And then now I don't even know who this title company is, but they're asking me for documentation as well. So it's like, and then I got to figure out, do I even want this house after the inspection report comes in, and I'm trying to negotiate, cleaning the gutters and getting the downspouts in the proper place. So it's like everything. And then, oh, by the way, I got to transfer money. So it's like these fits of starts and stops on this continuum of a 30 or 45 day journey now to buy a house, where we got to slow the gear down and say, look, this is important in this chaos that we're trying to orchestrate, make seem chaos to you. But, are we properly transferring that information and that knowledge? So, all right, last question. Katie, can you roll the screen up a little bit? Are closing software portals, what's the question, really more secure than like secure email?
Zix or like DocuSign.
Okay, so the question is, are some companies, Stephen, we haven't done this because we see vulnerability, but others have, and I'm not going to point holes anyway, but is a software portal more secure than Zix or secure email? And maybe I'll start to answer this is, if your account has been compromised, secure email is only going to guarantee that the email is received by the fraudster. So that's the challenge with email account compromise. A secure email secures it in transit, but when it hits that account, typically the fraudster can just create a username and password or reset one if it's already been created, and then they unlock that now secure sequence, which I even think ups the game of trust that they could exploit. And I am pro secure email. We use it, but again, it's secure email layered with some of the other things. Any thoughts you may have, Stephen? And maybe this is just too nuanced, but portals, secure emails, any type of, like, when we're exchanging PII or personal information?
So nothing is 100% foolproof. The saying in the business goes, it's not if you're going to be hacked, but when you're going to be hacked. So anything can be hit. But again, like I've said before, these guys take the path of least resistance. You throw as many obstacles in front of them, they will pivot, or they will try to move elsewhere. Not saying it's fully, 100%, because a lot of times they exploit the human vulnerabilities in this. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with people that they use the same password for everything. So they know your email password. You have the secure portal that they see in your email account. They just go there and put your email password in, and voila, it works. And then they're in there too. So, nothing is foolproof, but again, the more obstacles you can put in place for the criminals, the more secure you're going to be.
Top settings to put on a Gmail or other free web service account. So what would you see? Multi-factor authentication, number one, email forwarding blocker, anything else, any other quick hits or tips that you could give the group?
Yeah, two-factor authentication is number one. Then manually, you need to go in and check your settings, on a relatively regular basis. Every time you do it, as every time you decide to reset your password, go in and check all your settings to make sure everything is copacetic, to make sure nothing's been changed.
Are virus detection softwares laughable to hackers, or do they actually work?
They do work in some points, but like, again, hackers are moving at a faster rate of speed than we are. Then because they don't have to go through, all the steps and all the processes of verification, everything we have to do. So they can obviously move faster. So they are generally a step ahead. But I mean, again, as I said before, anything you can do, use technology to your advantage to make yourself safer.
Stephen, I want to wrap this up. Thank you for the time today, coming in on a holiday. I'll speak to everyone that attended today that it's really important, the work that you guys are doing. We'll continue to do our part through education, through awareness, through information sharing, to give you guys what you need. But thanks again for attending, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated.
Take care.
Take care, guys.